Welcome to the Female CEO podcast, hosted by Mark Sephton. You may know her name, but do you know her story? This podcast takes you behind the titles and into the moments that shape some of today's most inspiring women. We explore the paths they've taken, the businesses they've built, and how they've created success on their own terms. Created by the Female CEO Create, Evolve, Overcome, these are honest, human conversations, rooted in real experience. Let the journey begin.
Welcome to the Female CEO. I'm really happy for today's guest because it's somebody that I am quite familiar with. We've done many collaborations before, and it's always been great fun and also a lot of wisdom, a woman that I really respect in the world of business. Today, I'm joined by someone who sits at the powerful intersection of high-level leadership and deep psychological well-being. Babita Spinelli is a globally recognized psychotherapist, relationship expert, former Wall Street executive, and founder of the Babita Spinelli Group. She works closely with high-achieving individuals, C-suite executives, and founders to strengthen emotional resilience, deepen relationships, and elevate leadership effectiveness, helping them move from high performance to truly aligned and meaningful success. Her work blends clinical expertise with practical strategies supporting leaders as they navigate the complex pressures of expectation, burnout, and the mental demands that come with operating at the top. Babita has been featured in Forbes, Bloomberg, The Washington Post, and Men's Health, and is the recipient of the Psychotherapist of the Year award in both 2024 and 2025. Babita, it's a real privilege to have you here to explore what it truly means to lead with clarity, alignment, and mental strength. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Mark. Such a pleasure to be here.
And so many accolades, so much depth, so much variety, Babita. I'm sure that you probably wouldn't have it any other way.
I wouldn't have it any other way. Love what I do, passionate about my work, and I do think the personal and the professional do line up, and they overlap into that holistic being. And so that's why it's very important to me to kind of work in a space that's broad like that, around the relationship space as well as the leadership space.
Is there one particular achievement or accolade that really kind of feels like a badge of honor to you?
That's a great question. It's interesting, even as you were describing me, it was kind of interesting to hear it all in one place about myself. But really, I think at the end of the day, probably the one that stands out for me is just more about me leaning into overall my expertise and the impact I'm able to kind of put out into the world. So hearing about the features or the psychotherapist of the year, et cetera, is more for me about being able to bring what I feel is very important work on a more global level. So it's the combination of what you shared in terms of my accolades.
Nice. Babita, you work with many C-suite leaders. You maintain a composed exterior while navigating intense internal pressures. Why is the perfectionist mask in particular so dangerous, not just for the individual, but for the culture they lead? And what is the first safe step in removing it without feeling like authority is lost?
Yes, it's an interesting one, because when leaders come to me, they're really concerned that if they work on their mental health and understand their patterns and build their emotional intelligence, is it going to take away from the kind of work they do? Is it going to take away from their edge? Like, that's legitimately a fear. And we kind of work through that. And part of that is there is a perfectionist quality because our system has nurtured leadership to ensure that they're driving results and modeling something that is a template of perfection, right? And there is a lot of pressure around that. And so what tends to happen is there's the healthy perfectionist, and then there's actually the unhealthy. The healthy perfectionist is a conscientious individual that pays attention to their work, maybe has a particular kind of work ethic, and is able to, that cares about their work product, right? That cares about how they show up in leadership. So we may not even want to call that healthy perfectionism, but I do label it as that. The unhealthy perfectionist aspect is because there is a chronic expectation that takes place in leadership roles to always drive results in a successful way, quickly, urgently, and for everything to be done right, that we cannot have mistakes. And there are industries where mistakes can be loom very large. So it breeds a perfectionist expectation that tends to happen. We could also see the roots of those come from an internal drive that might be an intergenerational pattern as well, where if we've had parents that have advocated being perfect and not allowed for disappointments or mistakes, you're going to then nurture an individual whose part of their personality will be to be perfect. And that creates an extensive amount of unhealthy pressure versus just saying, you know what, I'm going to be putting in, my best version self, and I can still do an incredible, impactful job as a leader.
I think it's good that you make the difference there, because I've not heard anybody actually share the difference between, a healthy perfection and unhealthy. So that's definitely food for thought. I know that you deal a lot with burnout. We often think that burnout, Babita, comes from long hours, but it's often rooted in our internal relationships with work. What early warning signs show up in a leader's thinking and behavior, and how do those begin to affect decision making and team dynamics before burnout becomes visible?
What a beautiful question. I'm so glad we're discussing this because often when we hear about burnout, we hear about it in the sense of that someone doesn't have enough self-care. And this is what you need to do for self-care, right? Get a hobby, go outside, etc. But in the space of leadership, it is the indicators are sort of I would say it's almost like the slow drip and then the faucet gets like louder and higher. What tends to happen in leadership is burnout begins when there is a consistent misalignment of the pressure of how our work identity is in terms of how to show up with some of what might be our own needs, and trying to find that balance doesn't happen. So, for example, when there is, which tends to happen for leaders, cognitive overload, where the leader is constantly needing to make decisions and they're always in firefighter mode. They feel that they not constantly need to be in charge or in control as I would say the thermometer versus a thermostat, right? And so they're constantly modeling an urgency of doing. Eventually, that does lead to decision fatigue, which will be an indicator, right, that they're starting to be burnt out. They will slow down. They will feel less clear about their decisions. They will find themselves actually being exhausted, but also on high alert all the time. Their cortisol levels are high, so they will be awake between 2 and 4 a.m., which is also an indicator. They lead with anxiety is a real indicator of burnout, which we can talk about some more because I think that's really a powerful thing in terms of leadership mental health. They start to detach from their teams, and so they are not leading as empathically. So those are indicators as well. They are irritable and have less tolerance in their personal life. They're not inspired anymore in terms of their non-work identity. They are no longer finding joy and fulfillment or bringing in and paying attention to other things that are priorities in their life. Those are all indicators of burnout, I think, generally for people, but especially around leaders, C-suite, anybody in a high achieving, environment. And often they won't know because their barometers are off, because they are high achievers and those are the expectations of them. So when someone comes to me, they're actually coming when they're already in a place of, I need to leave this job, or I need to recover, versus recognizing it's a matter of just recalibrating. But because their barometer is off, there's no aerial view for them. They have already gone through a numerous amount of indicators without even knowing that that's where they're at.
That's very, very fascinating. Burnout is one of those things that often I think people capture too late. It's like it's at the tail end, like when you start seeing the signals, it's already kind of past the point of where you really need a reset, isn't it?
It's so true. And I really believe that that does tend to happen, especially for a very high achieving individual, because that's what they know. It's also probably what they've been taught intergenerationally. So either they've come in with a pattern of learning from their caregivers um, about the overachieving space and the doing and how their productivity is attached to their self-value. So they're not going to understand when they're at burnout. Or it might even be the opposite, where they've been surrounded by at spaces where there hasn't been necessary a drive to achieve, or there's been a lot of trauma. And so they're determined to not be those individuals and not, go into a space that is of what they think is weakness. And so they're not going to know, because they see the world and the perspective differently until they fully, deeply understand, like, and take that temperature check for themselves. Wow, like, I didn't even realize that this is happening. That's why it doesn't happen until recovery mode. That's why it's almost as if a hammer is hitting over their head and they're saying, hey, I think I'm at burnout, versus recognizing it, because it's the patterns and the templates of part of I call it the Mr. Rogers sweater. Mr. Rogers would put on that sweater and then it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. It's what they've known. So that's how they operate until they recognize otherwise.
Female CEOs often carry both external expectations and the internal pressure around what a powerful woman should look like. How can leaders distinguish between authentic ambition and performative pressure that leads to chronic stress?
I do feel that female CEOs do have an extensive amount of pressure to show up in a way of constantly demonstrating impact and outcomes. The data shows that women tend to go into a role of feeling like they're always trying to prove themselves, versus going in saying, I've already proven myself by the virtue of who I am, right? I'm already showing up, and I'm showing up with something that I feel passionate about and something I want to do. And this align with my values. And this is what I want to model to either the organization or in your own business. And so what happens is, when we're not aligned with that part and reconnect with saying, this is like who I am and these are my values, we tend to fall into a trap as a female CEO to consistently feel the pressure of showing up in what we think is constantly achieving and proving and demonstrating our worth, versus saying, yeah, I'm a CEO. This is what I want to do. This is aligned with how I want to lead. I want to make a difference in whatever it is that I'm doing as a CEO. That means a lot to me. And here we are. Bring it on.
Beautiful. Yeah, I find it really interesting, the amount of incredible women we've had on the female CEOs so far. And for me, obviously, I'm not a woman, so I'm obviously already handicapped in terms of the challenges and pressures that you have. And of course, if you're not a woman, then there's only so much that you can say. Like, it reminds me of childbirth. Like, a man has never experienced that, so he can never really understand the fullness of what's going on there. For men that wanting to support female leaders in terms of helping them manage stress and helping them flourish, what would be your piece of advice to us men in terms of the best things that we can do to really support women in leadership?
Well, I think there's something about allowing a a woman to really feel like she can bring her full self in and not be ashamed of some of the things that come up as women to lead authentically. You know, often the women CEOs, the female CEOs, might be in midlife. They might also, right, be a parent. They may have to take maternity leave. They are navigating a sense of balance between, you know, family as well as their role as a leader. And I think an understanding of being able to feel like she can bring her full self in is a wonderful supportive aspect, whether it's coming from a man or even the system in general. Some of the female leaders that I work with are also in perimenopause, you know, menopause. And I think there's sometimes a lot of shame to even like bring that in. That does not take away from their leadership, but it is something that one should allow for to be able to for a woman to feel like it is okay for me to take care of myself and recognize that.
Mm,
So those are just some of the more nuanced things that I think aren't talked about. And it's uncomfortable conversations. The best thing that can be supportive for female CEOs and for female leaders is to allow there to be a comfort level in fully being a woman and still saying, I am an effective leader. And my template, we don't have to be the same template as a man. Everyone can have their own template in terms of how they want to lead. It doesn't even have to be about gender. So just allowing that to happen, and I think removing some of those stigmas of
mm,
how one is supposed to be in that role, allowing that creative aspect to come in and removing the competition. There doesn't need to be competition. Everybody can authentically lead as a CEO, and females can authentically lead as a CEO and allow your unique selves to come in. That's where I think, whether it's men or the system itself, we could just really nurture that and empower women to feel that. And also our younger um, women, the younger generation, I think they are breaking more of those stigmas. And we have a lot of unbelievable women out there in their 20s who are founders that are killing it. You know,
mm,
they're doing really well. And they've also broken an intergenerational pattern, some coming from spaces where they had to really push to even get education. So I think breaking patterns and stigmas around that is probably already happening, but I think we could continue to nurture that and have more open dialogue in those conversations and not be afraid of them.
mm. Good, that's helpful. Shame's an interesting one of how it can really bury you and prevent you from communicating and sharing your truth. And I just think I'm a real big believer that regardless of how difficult something is, I think sharing your truth is so important for the depth and the good of relationships. Because when you don't share your truth, you end up becoming almost uh, insular and you stay within yourself. And then relationally, people can't really understand or go deeper with you. They just think, what's going on with you? Because I can see the shift. I can see the distance or with the withdrawal, and then it becomes actually problematic for everybody.
Absolutely. So if we take it and we look at it on the side of high achieving leaders, we can then say, like, when their mental health, when they're not aligned with their truth and really understanding themselves deeply and taking care of themselves in that way, then what's going to happen, what they're going to model is that is going to show up because there's going to be a closed door energy about this individual, which is going to create a lot of stress for themselves, the people they lead, let's say their team, even in their families, because they are not even understanding their own truth to be able to even speak their truth. And so what's happening is what they're modeling is head down, drive the outcome. Everything is urgent, which creates a lot of anxiety and stress. Whereas when they're aligned with their truth, when they're understanding that through their mental health journey, which I truly believe how significant that is, they're understanding their truth, that's going to ripple effect in personally in their relationships and professionally, because they're allowing their identity to come in and they can lead more empathically. So they can say, you know what? Yeah, there's some stress today. I think we're all under a lot of pressure. I'm feeling it, but we're going to be in this together. Like, I'm with you on this. My door is open and I get it because I feel it too. That's showing your truth, right? Versus shutting down, not being able to express that, not showing any empathy. And then that happens also on the home front, where we're not showing our truth. Our relationships break down. Our partners don't know how we're feeling. Our families don't know what we're going through because we're not connecting to our truth. Because either one, we're not communicating about it. But I think, Mark, the deeper part is we don't even know what that is because either we're ashamed to get to it or we're not doing the work or investing in our mental health to really learn about ourselves, to know what our truth is.
Yeah, it's very profound. Babita, in the C-suite, constant high-stake decisions are very much normal. How does declining mental health impact cognitive clarity, and what can leaders do in the everyday to really protect their decision-making when they feel overwhelmed?
Sure. I mean, so the first part is when I hear about this, I think about the amount of pressure and the amount of decisions that a C-suite needs to make, and also the weight of the world that they feel is on their shoulders because they feel that one decision could destabilize an organization. Like that's really, and I'll tell you literally what they're expressing, how they feel, right? So I think one of the things to keep in mind is that for a C-suite, their executive mental health and folding that into their life is really important. Taking a step back to have a mentorship or a thought leader to partner with, getting perspective around what might be their patterns contributing to this cognitive overload. How can they make some small changes in the way they operate as a C-suite? Where do they even models? Like, do they even know what taking breaks is? Is work and as a C-suite just 7 days a week where it's always on their mind and they never put it away on the shelf? So one of the things is, how do you learn how to set even your own internal boundaries? You can still be an effective C-suite, but you need to think about, do I ever put it away? And putting it away can give you more clarity because you're giving yourself breaks. You're allowing your brain to shift into a non-work identity, which means you're nourishing yourself, which means you're recharging your battery, which means you go back in and you're able to lead with more clarity and you're able to make decisions with more intention. Which brings me to my next point. Instead of bullet firing decision making, which says to me when a C-suite does that or is expressing that, is they're running on anxiety versus say, wait, how am I really feeling about this? How important is this decision right now? Is this decision my responsibility? Can I delegate this? What else do I need to do? And is this something that I'm treating as an urgency along the 100 other things versus saying, this is a slow simmer, let me take my time with this? When we do that, that means as a C-suite that we're living with intention, but that has to also be learned. We're not living based on anxiety. We're not living based on our cortisol levels being high. We are living and working and leading with intention, which then ultimately helps us to reduce cognitive overload, which then helps us to be one step ahead of burnout. And that's just, there's so much to this, but that's just a little snippet of the answer to your question. I think the other thing a leader can also do is to also realize, like, is this aligning with my values? Am I allowing my work identity and those parts of me to always lead? Can I ever turn that off? Can I ever say, hey, who am I? Like, am I having parts of me always leading without pausing and thinking about a bigger holistic picture about who I am and not being afraid of that? Like, you'll still be an effective C-suite when you do that. And just, doing a little bit of that, more of that reflection and deeper work. And then going back to, am I still appreciating the simple things and bringing that in to my life to create some sense of balance? The challenge for C-suite is they're very afraid that, can they do those things? But I think with the right attention and the right effort, it starts to become more organic, and it doesn't take away from their abilities to be an effective leader. In fact, they will inspire and motivate their teams more because they are going to come in with an energy space that's going to be different than the one where they're on cognitive overload and exhausted.
Mm. I think about my desire for presence over performance. I
Mm.
think about the people that I've interviewed at the top. I think about how a lot of us, our identity is often wrapped up in our work. I think about one of the best questions we can ask ourselves is, who are we when we're not being useful? I feel
Yes.
like that really helps create a space for us to ruminate on what that is. High achievers often identify their identity in direct correlation to their output. So
Mm.
slowing down can feel often comfortable. How do you see leaders reconnect with who they are beyond what they do? And how does that shift then change the way they lead others?
Okay, great question. I'm going to put my psychoanalyst hat on for a moment because I think this is really important. It kind of, even though I do like coaching, I still think like an analyst as well. Um, you have to also first go back and really think about the roots of where this is coming from, how this was formed, that your full identity is based on the doing and the productivity and the performance, and then your self-value and self-worth is connected to that. Like, where did that originally come from? And understanding how that's become so formative in order to make the changes, to recognize that it is not always about attaching to productivity, but aligning with my vision and my values and who I am and what is meaningful, etc. And that still doesn't mean that one doesn't honor outcomes. But I think that the performance and the productivity comes from a more deeper rooted place and can also be nurtured over time around systemic expectations by teachers, by what's out in the world and those influences. So important to understand where it comes from, important to recognize and build that one's self-worth is also outside of performance, and that your work identity is not your whole identity. And that doesn't mean that you are not passionate about what you do, if that is what it is. But there is more parts to you than just that. And we're not living, if we're only living in our work identity, we're losing so many different parts that are sleeping,
Mm.
that are needed, that want to come alive. And so that would be, I mean, there's so much here too, but I think that that would be just a part of like really looking at those parts of yourself and reconnecting to those parts and ask, as you said, like, what parts are dormant? Who did I lose? How do I reclaim those parts and bring it into partner with my work identity? Or sometimes even just put that aside and lead. Let me get on that sailboat and spend a
Mm.
few hours and enjoy it. Like, let me remind myself of the husband that I am, the father that I am, the mother that I am, the sailor that I am, right? Let me go back to that and revisit that and then bring that in to find balance.
Mm. What do you think a leader becomes when they kind of shift from the performance to start really leading from who they truly are?
Oh, it is so beautiful to see because I've actually been able to witness and that transformation. One, their dopamine and serotonins are higher. They're like happier. They're happier waking up in the morning. They're more clear mentally. Um, they find that they're not as exhausted. They are able to motivate and inspire their teams in a more clear, confident, relaxed way. And so they're actually finding that that is actually driving better outcomes and results, and they're feeling great about it. They are showing up in their life, in their relationships, in their friendships, and their relationship to self in a more emotionally intelligent way. There is more attunement to the people around them. They're also able to be more relatable. They are no longer as anxious. They are no longer firefighting, but building. And they're building an internal system of health and wellness for themselves, but an external system of health and wellness and excellence as a leader. And it is incredible in terms of how they feel. They will walk into my door and say, "Oh my gosh, I don't know. Like, I did this great presentation. I felt great about it. And I was just authentically me. And board members loved it. My team is inspired by it. And I'm seeing like so much change. And I went home and I was like, hey, everybody, let's go to dinner. Let's have a great time." And I could turn it off. I could literally turn it off. And I am no less than a leader because I'm leading my life too. I'm the leader of my life. That I would say, I'm actually working on a book that, like leadership is human.
Mm.
Leadership is human. And that's how they feel. They feel like they're going back to being a human being in all of its glory.
Beautiful. That book sounds like it's very timely. Um, and I love that you have walked this process as well. And like me, you're very excited and passionate about seeing change and bringing about clarity and alignment to other people, to see people really leading from themselves. They say that the hardest person to lead is self, but obviously everything derives from our relationship with how we're showing up for ourselves. Really shines a light on how we show up for other people.
It's so true. Like, show yourselves grace, figure out how to love yourself truly, understand yourself better. And it is so true. When that happens and we're able to have a relationship to ourselves, it's like we're hugging ourselves as we're kind of navigating spaces. Um, how does that not influence our relationship with others? Like, it is going to, because it does start with you, as cliche as that sounds. Um, and I do believe that we do ourselves a disservice by not
Mm.
taking care of our mental well-being. And we can
Uh,
define that and look at that and figure that out. But it does start with really saying, like, where am I with my mental health right now? What's happening in my life? How can I really think about that in the relationship to myself and others?
mm. We've only got a few moments left, Babita. Yesterday, I heard someone say to only do business with people that you would hug. So I found that really interesting. So I kind of wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on hearing that, and then let people know how they can find out more about you and where they can find out more about your work.
Sure. It's an interesting quote, only do business with people that you would hug, because I would say yes and no. So we're not always going to be fortunate enough to do business with individuals that may be exactly aligned with that, like the hug component, right? I think that there has to be a certain amount of course, respect, and you don't want to do business with someone that you feel doesn't align with certain values or that may have some toxicity, about them, things of that nature. But you may not always want to hug, so to speak, the person you do business with. They uniquely stand alone. So I think the beauty of it is do check in with who you're doing business with and if they are at least aligned with a sense of like values. But they may also be someone that you may need to navigate how we might work differently in a space where we're trying to figure out a sense of co-creation, because we may not always see certain perspectives in a certain way. And so we may not want to hug them, but can we get to a place where we'll hold their hand
Mm, very good.
and respect each other and respect
Mm,
each other's views, and
mm,
then take it and navigate it from there. Maybe at the end of it, there's hugging, but it may not always be that in its
mm,
totality.
mm. Okay. Good to have your thoughts. And how do people find out more about you, Babita?
All right. Well, there's my website, babitaspinelligroup.com, my traditional practice, which is openingthedoorspsychotherapy.com, which is like the first company that I had formed, and then group came later. Um, they can also email me. So I'm imagining that the link will show like my contact information. And I'm still a traditionalist. Call me. Really, like call me and I will ultimately answer and have a conversation. And so they can also do that. And then tons of like resources that I try and put out there, articles that I write and stuff like that. So they can also connect with me in that way, if not like directly, but also about saying, I'd love to hear more about like the work that I'm doing.
Mm, beautiful. Babita, it's been so good to have you on the Female CEO podcast. I've loved the depth and the richness of this one.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. It's always so great to sit in the same space with you and speak with you. And I look forward to us connecting in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Female CEO podcast, created by the Female CEO Create, Evolve, Overcome. This podcast amplifies women's voices, stories, and lived experience. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on our YouTube channel, and discover more at thefemaleceo.com.